Great to have Dr. Amber Howard here from Missouri State University. She's an assistant professor in the College of Education. Amber, describe a little bit about what your unique position is currently.
I am the Dean's Fellow for Competency-Based Education, which means that I get to work with school districts across the state as they implement competency-based education initiatives in an effort to eventually replace the MAP test is the big picture goal. So I get to be part of that work, which is really
Now, Amber, tell me a little bit again, and understanding that this is relatively new for old timers like me, okay?
yep.
And the concept of eliminating the MAP test is mind blowing to some of us. Can you talk us a little bit through that process again? I know that's something that's down the road, but can you give me
Yeah.
the pathway that would get you to that point statewide?
Yeah, it is down the road and that it's happening next month, which is pretty shocking. There's a couple of districts in the state that are actually taking the lead on being the pilots to replace the MAP test with an alternative. And so they have a waiver from the state to have an alternative to the standardized test. And what that looks like is different for each district, but they are creating a dashboard that shows that students are meeting the standards and the competencies for each course without having to show that through a standards based test. So for some districts, that looks a profile of a graduate where they, as a district, has decided in our community, we want our graduates to show X, Y, and Z. And the graduates show that in a profile way or a portfolio. In other districts, they have a dashboard that still uses the district assessments like iReady or NWEA or assessments like that they're already taking to show that they're meeting standards in that way. And then they're not having to double test like most districts are already doing. So districts are just approaching it in a way that shows we're already showing we're meeting these standards. Why are we double testing students? There's a lot of work happening towards that and a whole working group that's making it happen. And they're doing a lot of hard work to try to make it go across the state. But there's just a few districts that really have the waiver right now to try to take the lead on it.
Okay, talk me through this again. This isn't just as simple as a school district saying, contacting DESE and saying, we're not going to do the map.
No, although parents do have the power to say, my student will not take the
I'll
MAP
take the map.
test. So that is a parent choice thing that you can say. But no, districts do not have that authority. There is a long process that takes place, and districts can join the Success Ready Student Network and work their way through that process. And like I said, I think it's just 4 districts right now that kind of have the official waiver. And we're working like DESE and this working group with the SRSN, the Success Ready Student Network, are working on getting a federal waiver so that we can continue innovating our assessment and accountability system just like across the entire state. But it is a long process and we've been working on it since 2021 really intentionally. 4 years of really hard work, and we're just now at the point where a couple districts are starting to be like, "Okay, we're ready to not take this assessment."
Amber, you know that my passion is rural education. And so I know
Yeah.
that so many times when it involves, I don't mean to be ornery about this, but a lot of districts have assistant superintendents of curriculum and instruction and things like, but when you're a small rural school district, you're the principal and you're about it in many cases
Yep.
as far as
Yep.
support networks. Can you talk to me a little bit again about how this is impacting rural schools or what challenges rural schools might have in looking at this new way to test?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. The great thing is, like, when you go to the SRSN website, it's just srsnmo.org, you can see who is participating in this work. And there's over 100 districts now. I can't keep up with how many districts there are because they're adding them constantly. And there are probably 50 or more rural districts, including
Yeah.
like Thayer and Oak
I think
Grove and like
I
these
think Kabul's
small
on there.
districts.
I was on Kabul's website yesterday and I saw it come up on the website.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of really small districts on here, and they are working to create these ecosystems around the state to where those rural districts can collaborate to work together to have more connections so they can make these kind of real world ecosystem. So, like, for example, in Springfield, there's all these great programs for students to like the Health Services Academy and the Wolf School and the Academy of Fine and Performing Arts. Those are great because it's a huge district. But what is Kabul going to do? They don't have access to that. But if Kabul collaborates with other districts around there, then maybe collectively they can create kind of an ecosystem. And so they're called conveners. That's a funny word to me, but there are conveners all across the state that are connecting these rural districts to create those groups so that they can work towards competency based learning in rural areas across the state. Rural schools have not been ignored in this process of competency based work. And they've actually been really intentional about trying to bring them into this and support them along the way.
I thank you to you and whoever else has been involved in that process because I can't remember. Amber, where did you teach at when you were in the public schools?
I taught mostly in Springfield Public Schools, so I
Okay,
was
see,
lucky to be in a big district. Yeah,
the largest
I
school
was
district in
well
the state.
resourced.
I could just remember, and again, so many of the people that are taking this class, they're going to be first year teachers here in a couple of years, and many of
Yeah,
them are going to be in small rural school districts. And I want to make sure
yeah,
that people understand that one of the blessings of going to a Willard or a Republic or a
right,
Springfield that they have the administrative infrastructure to really lead these initiatives. But when you're in a small
yeah,
rural school district as a classroom teacher, you may be the one going to the meetings, surprisingly.
right.
And so knowing that there that is that network that's there that is being intentional about understanding the unique challenges of rural schools, that's fantastic. So I appreciate that.
Sure, for sure.
Yes.
And we've also brought on the Rural School Collaborative and the Center for Rural Education at Missouri. So they're being really intentional about making sure that those rural schools get support.
Great. And one of the blessings that Amber, I know you and I both have reaped this harvest before, is that teachers, it's just not in their vocabulary when people ask for help for them to say no. And so many times that you hear about things going on in other school districts, but you don't even know you're interested, but you don't even know how to start that. And
Yeah,
my motto, I don't have any tattoos, but if I had one, it would be steal great ideas ruthlessly. And sometimes we just forget to just ask for help. And your background in Springfield Public Schools, I can remember years ago when I was an administrator at Kabul, I cannot tell you how many times Springfield Public Schools was so generous to us in providing support on grant writing, or even if we were
yeah,
initiating a new curriculum that if it was a part of Springfield Public Schools, they would even let us come up to their training in Springfield Public Schools. So sometimes we're just not bravest thing we could do is ask for help. But
absolutely.
it's a great thing about our career that when you ask for help, almost every time they're willing to help. So that's good to know
Yeah.
that you're there talking about competency based assessment. Now let me dig a little bit more into that, and I'm just going to play devil's advocate here. Okay. Tell me why this isn't just an easy way out. Why we all understand how standardized testing, and if we all give that standardized test, I'll be able to compare whether Willard and Republic, which one's doing a better job of teaching kids. But on this competency based thing, how am I going to go through and measure if I'm doing a good job?
Yeah, yeah, it's a good question. So I think the thing that competency-based assessment does really well is it brings in locality and like a place-based approach that standardized tests miss. So one part of, like I mentioned earlier, a profile of a graduate, Kabul is going to look for different skills than Springfield is going to look for in their graduates just because of where they are. And they want different things from their graduates. So why are we assessing the same things? And the thing that I always tell my students is standardized tests measure standardized students. What classroom has standardized students? None. Like we teach them differentiated instruction and how to teach every student and how every student is different. And yet then we're told that we have to give a standardized test. And it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit the teaching philosophy that we're trying to build in them. And so it just feels so inauthentic to say, yeah, we have to do standardized testing and also standardized testing, it doesn't match anything that we're doing. But competency based assessment at least takes a step towards, okay, in this area, competency looks like this. And we're going to bring in, like, we know that the skills that we need in Springfield are X, Y, and Z. But we know the skills that we need in Grain Valley include something totally different. And we can assess that differently because we are empowered to do so through this competency based process.
I know at some time in your career, this whole idea of concept of competency based was new to you. What was coming from a maybe a more traditional training, going
Yeah,
to a
yeah,
more competency based, what was the part that finally at some point something shifted in your mind where you got it? And
right.
tell me your aha moment.
So funny enough, I fell into this role of competent, like the dean's fellow in general, without fully understanding that I was doing competency based assessment when I was teaching. And I'll talk about this later when I compared traditional grading and everything. When I was teaching elementary school, I was doing competency based learning without really knowing that's what it was called. And I think Dr. Tinkler, the dean of the College of Education, recognized that. And she came to me and was like, "Hey, I have this fellowship. Do you want to do it?" And I was like, "I have no idea what competency based learning is." Tinkler said, "Do you? I think you would be well suited for this position." And I was like, "I don't know what you me, but I'll try." And it turns out like it was exactly what I was doing without really fully understanding that that's what I was doing. And then I started reading and researching, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I know this. I was doing it." And from there, I just was like, "Oh, yeah, this was the aha moment." It was like applying the learning post applying it, basically. Like reading about it was like, "Oh, that's what I was doing back when I was in the classroom." So I think I was maybe born to have a non traditional approach to education.
Okay, Amber, tell me this as far as when you work with people that are trying to learn more about competency based instruction, what do you think is the biggest? It may be a mental hurdle, it may be a skill hurdle. What is the biggest hurdle that teachers, when they're first starting out with competency based learning, struggle with?
Yeah, so that's an easy answer. I'm part of the master teacher cadre right now, which is part of the Success Ready Student Network. And the teachers that are part of that are brand new to competency based education. So the reason it's an easy answer is because I was just in a room with teachers that are like, "What is this?" And they were all like, "I have no idea what this is and I'm scared." And it feels overwhelming at first, but then when you start digging in and getting into the nitty-gritty of it, teachers were like, "Oh, I'm already doing part of this." It's just that mind shift of getting away from the traditional grading system. And what they get stuck on is, "Okay, to do this, we've gotta redo the whole system." But how do I redo the whole system? And that's where they just were like, I guess I can't." And then they don't try. So they get stuck on the whole systemic part of it. But there's so many things that they can do outside of blowing up the system.
So talk me through that. So your advice to someone that in that position, is it to do a little bit and see, or what's your
Yeah.
advice as far as moving forward into next steps?
Ultimately, changing the system is good. But there's so many things you can do in your classroom, like start doing proficiency scales, start bringing in real world learning. Like like that shift from a standard to a competency is an easy shift. Like instead of teaching just the standard, what is the skill that actually you're trying to measure? What's something that they can apply that to in the actual world? I think when you make that shift, then it makes learning so much more meaningful in your classroom. And then people start taking notice. That's what happened when I was teaching. When we started doing PBL, then all of a sudden we got the attention of the district and then people outside the district, and then everybody's coming to our classroom, which was fine. And it was great to have people seeing all the great work that we were doing and seeing the cool stuff our students were creating. But when people start taking notice, then that's how we change the system, right? From the inside is good teachers doing good work. And it's hard, but if you want to change the system from the inside, that's kind of what you got to do.
This doesn't fit exactly with it, but you mentioned earlier the concept of place-based learning, which those of us in
Yeah.
rural ed have been advocates about for years,
Yeah.
as far as what is unique about resources that you have in your community that we don't have in a big city. And I'll use, for example, we don't have to bring all of our rural kids to Wonders of Wildlife to learn about outdoor life in rural parts of
Right.
Missouri.
Yes.
We have our own streams, we have our own animals that we can observe rather than coming in to the zoo at Dickerson Park at Springfield or Wonders of Wildlife. And
Mhm.
I can remember years ago, and I was principal at Kabul for 9 years, and I remember a teacher came in one day and said, this was a math teacher, by the way, came into class and said, what process would I have to go through to get a bus to take us out to the cemetery, which was on the other end of town? And I was sitting there thinking, what does a math teacher want to go to the cemetery for? But it was part of his place-based learning concept was they were going to go out and establish a data set of birth dates and death dates, and they were going to go through and use that to calculate average death by generation. And but I remember that was an eye-opening because immediately the students were engaged, and I was not. And by the way, historically, I am not a person that likes math, but that would have interested me. That would have
Mhm.
engaged me. And I remember I said, I'm going with you. I could drive a bus. I had a bus driving certificate. So it was easy. We just had to go get a bus and the principal drive you over. So I drove them over, and to see those kids, many of which had no interest in math at
Exactly.
all, but they were interested in just starting out simply going tombstone into tombstone, documenting birth dates, death dates,
Yeah.
and then coming back after we've established our data set, we can come back to the classroom, start working on a math concept, but the connection was made by the experience in that community. And
Exactly.
so I think of that all the time is that even when to go to art music, not that we don't take kids into these things, but just saying that sometimes we forget that our own local context should also play a part in the assessment. And that's what I love about this is
Absolutely.
that, like you
Yes.
said, we're going to
Yes.
test something a little different in Kabul than they are in Springfield.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. I appreciate you, Dr. Amber Howard here at Missouri State University, and I'll put her contact information on here.